Well, I'm very excited to talk to you today about the professional development for company-wide growth. You've been in construction for so many years now, many different companies, so it's great to see that learning and development has been a part of each area there.
Yeah.
I'd love to ask you some questions about that people development and that personal effect that it
Okay.
has on there.
I love it. Ask away.
When you're developing a new program, where do you start?
Ooh, usually with the business goals. I think so often learning and development comes in and they're like, okay, they have this agenda of we've got to do all these trainings, and or worse, they're like, let's start off with the easy stuff, and so let's just like knock out a compliance training or a sexual harassment training, which we all know, like if you're going to start a new initiative, you want it to be exciting, and sexual harassment, not going to say is on the exciting list. So as often as I possibly can, and what I would recommend to others is like looking at the overall business goals and how can you align whatever trainings or overall kind of people operations initiative that you're going to do, how can you align that to the overall business goals? Examples could be, you know, we are experiencing a lot of like profit margin fade, and so we want to reduce those expenses. Maybe that's looking at major losses that are happening on projects and trying to figure out what those major losses are and training on that to reduce it. Maybe it's around increasing revenue or like kind of jumping in further into a sector of the industry that maybe you haven't spent as much time in and that you're trying to gain another foothold in. So that could be kind of interview prep recommendations. It could be like negotiating. There could be around estimating for specific aspects of that type of construction that maybe you don't have as much experience in. FIAS obviously is huge right now in terms of going with the kind of net zero sustainability from an energy perspective. And so maybe that is an area that you want to grow and that you want to continue to get more FIAS related projects. And so doubling down and getting your folks certified in that could be another example of like how it might relate to the business. So big believer in kind of always connecting it to the business, seeing what those goals are, and then prioritizing and getting folks involved in that way.
Awesome. How do you get that buy-in when you're piloting a program?
Yeah, I do think a big part, like if you have the business goals, then you can relate it to revenue. And usually, when I think about business owners, I'm like, you have two options. It either has to be cost saving or it has to be money making. You don't get any opportunity in the middle. And so buy-in usually has a lot of value of, okay, if we're going to do this training, here are the goals that we want to associate them to. And we're going to have to spend a little bit more time up front, if this is the first time they're doing learning and development, trying to track that and ensuring that we can see some growth. Easier said than done, because some of it, like if you're wanting to increase revenue, you can't go to one training workshop and then the next day get a $10 million project. You maybe could, but it probably isn't aligned with that specific training. So something to acknowledge of like what you want that time frame to look like. Another piece on buy-in that I don't know if you're asking it in like specifically, but I think there's an aspect of piloting a program, so that if rather than saying, hey, we're gonna have everybody go through this, like this is the new initiative and we want everyone to go through it and it's gonna be $350,000 or whatever that number is, depending on the size of the organization, like doing a pilot. And if you can, I recommend having different levels within the organization participate in that. So maybe you've got a project executive, you've got a super, a PM, a project engineer, whatever the different roles are, different levels, folks in operations and non-operations, if the topic makes sense for that. And having them pilot it and getting their feedback to say, okay, what did you like about this workshop? What can you see the benefit? How can you see it aligning? And then what changes should we make for the future if it is something that you want to roll out kind of more broadly?
So once someone buys in, how do you make that learning experience feel more transformative, more than informative there?
Yeah. So that kind of makes me think a little bit about the like 70-20-10 model to learning that you are very familiar with. But 70% of, like if we had a circle in front of us or a pie in front of us that we had the delicious chance to be eating, 70% of how people learn is through experiences. And so ensuring that whatever, if this is a formal training, or if there are opportunities afterwards for folks to be able to take what they learned and utilize it in their day-to-day and make it more experiential, that would be one way to kind of make it transformative, that they're able to take something and test it out truly the next day. To kind of finish off that 70%, that pie, 20% is more of the social learning or mentoring. It's learning through others, and only 10% of it is the formal learning. And so when I think about making something more transformative than informative, I tend to try and think about like, okay, what can we do with that 70 and that 20% versus just the workshop or the one-off, 1 day, half day, 2-hour training. I tend to want to give, I love a good workbook.
Yes.
Love a good workbook. For better or worse, obviously that is part of the formal, but it's something that they can take away and maybe do something with. Any sort of documentation to align with kind of how they're going to be doing it on a day-to-day basis. And so if we are creating, some sort of new initiative, what documentation can they have afterwards? How can you really bring it into the overall company culture? And that might mean like updating your onboarding so that all new employees are getting this information. That might be updating your performance review process. That may mean doing check-ins with your team afterwards or with your manager on a certain area. So it depends on what the topic specifically is, but how can you kind of bring it into their day-to-day afterwards, or follow up with them if it should have already been the part of their day-to-day, to ensure that they're getting that understanding and have access to kind of being tested on it. Yeah, and I also think there's like outside of that 70-20-10 component, I'm a big believer that learning and development should be fun, especially if we're talking about a new initiative. And so how can you add a little bit of like fun and excitement and engagement in there? Could you, may sound silly, but are there aspects that like after the training, during the training, can it be fun? How can you just ensure that you instill a little bit of fun into those sessions? And then also like afterwards, is there a hard hat sticker that folks could get that they would be like pumped about, and there's a little bit of a competitive advantage. Some folks maybe don't care. If that's the case with your culture, like don't do that. Find some other way to kind of get people excited and rally around it, kind of creating a grassroots approach.
There are a lot of different ways to make it fun, but there is the office and the field. Very different trainings go into both. There are a lot of similarities as well. So how do you approach making a training so meaningful for both the office and the field?
I think one of the first things to acknowledge is getting them both involved at the same time. There's, often folks talk about how siloed the field and the office are. And if we continue to just have separate trainings for them at the same time, they're never getting the opportunity to interact and integrate with one another. So I think when the content makes sense, really being intentional of saying, we want project managers and superintendents in this session together, not separately. We don't want a separate session for PMs and for supers. We want them to be interacting with one another, because then they're just getting to know different people that maybe they don't interact with, hearing different perspectives. I think it adds a lot of value. I do understand that there's a coverage perspective. I'm a big believer that project managers can cover the job site for the superintendent when they're going to a workshop, and vice versa. And so as long as there's an understanding from the project team of who's going to be at a workshop, and that there's coverage on the project, it tends to be possible. I will say that I think if I had to, I was going to say supers maybe find it more difficult to come to trainings than PMs, and I would agree with that, especially in the formal learning sense. Because they are on site, they could be really far away, but it is all around how important you're telling your employees that this training is. And if you're saying, work with the team to make it work. This is really important for your overall growth and development. This is this is an initiative for us. We want to ensure people have the skills to be safe, to be continuously educated, to be able to, grow their own careers and personal lives. That will hit home. I had one when one of the first organizations I worked for, a senior PM said to the project executive, he said, I have this 1-day training and I have an owner's meeting. Which one should I go to? And the PX was like, you should go to the training. And next time, you should get ahead on that because you shouldn't have those two counteracting. You should have already planned appropriately for that. And that was a huge win from the learning and development team to acknowledge that the PX was on our side and wanted folks to be there. And so I almost think of it less as how can we make sure that there's training for PMs and supers, and more how can we just ensure the importance of the training, which means you've got to ensure that the content and the value of the training is there. Otherwise, the organization as a whole, the higher ups, are going to say, no, go to those meetings. You can watch the recording later or something along those lines. They're not going to put as much emphasis and importance on it. But I would say I almost think about it more in that way of understanding the importance as a whole. And then because there are differences, ensuring that you are able to work as a team to cover project sites so that the supers can learn that. The last thing I guess that I will add, because you asked the question, so how could we separate them, is thinking about the timing that might work for a superintendent. Is starting at 7:00 a great time to start a training? They've probably been on site for an hour already, and so any sort of issues that have happened, they are knee deep in. And so I'm kind of the mindset of can we do something in the afternoon, or do we start and not have them go to the job site at all, but that they plan, even if that means starting the training at 6 a.m., whatever time we're starting the training, so that they're not going in advance and only have a short period of time to be there, because then they'll get involved in the day-to-day and then we'll lose them. And I think when possible, is there value in kind of giving them content that they could do on their own? Some folks learn better that way. Could they and would they appreciate watching a recording at any time? Yes, maybe, but are they really gaining all that insight? And for those that like it, really having to be strong on being distraction free, because I think that's the hardest piece of the whole thing.
And once you successfully get the office and the field into these trainings, especially if it's a training that's maybe new to the company or a new type of topic, how do you measure that success once it's rolled out?
Yeah, again, it's always starting at the business goals and understanding what you want that initiative, what you want success to look like. And so that might mean that you've got to set up some initial plans for what success will look like for that company or for those individuals. And maybe it's okay after what, maybe it's even a management program. And so one of your goals is to reduce turnover. That you've found that when people are leaving because they're really frustrated by the managers that they're working with. And so that okay, put them through a 6-month management program, but are we going to be able to tell something from the beginning to the end? Maybe, but that 6 months is a long time to be able to understand if it's working or not. And so, if it's a 6-month program, are there kind of smaller milestones that you can create throughout that entire time frame? Are you having those managers' employees, the direct reports of those employees, are they filling out a survey beforehand to kind of talk through where this person thrives and where they are falling short? And then are we doing something at the end? Are we doing something halfway through? Are we kind of checking in with their own manager a month or two in to see how they're doing based on some of the topics that are being discussed or based on some of the issues that they have? Are we looking at turnover rate numbers? Are we kind of having individual, there's so many things that you can do, which excites me, but maybe to some of the people watching this video are that's terrifying. I don't even know where to start. And so again, my recommendation would be to look at the business goals and then try and align them the best way possible to the training that you are, or the learning initiative that you're hoping to focus on. And if possible, like breaking it down to say, okay, when do we think would be reasonable to have real measurements that we could associate this to? What might they look like? What am I going to be looking on the lookout for? And at what point do we have to acknowledge we might have to pivot, or we might have to like enhance or change it? I don't know that it fully answers your question. It's giving a lot of gray, but I think that's part of it because it's just different based on every company and their initiative.
Yeah, I think the gray is where usually people start anyways, and everybody needs to have a starting point. And I think as long as you're starting at those business goals and trying your best to make sure everybody in your company is successful and has the tools to grow is really the main goal. To work towards.
I would agree.
Great. Well, if a company does want to move forward with their business goals, what would be that first step in making it possible?
Yeah. We love this one. So if I think about learning and development, I tend to bucket it in like 5 or 6 different overall buckets. I think of it as like soft skills. Everybody needs them, whether they want them or not. Leadership skills, which very well, there's a lot that could maybe span both of those, but leadership skills I'll call out differently. We've got the technical skills, which is really just the day-to-day responsibilities that an employee has, and so making sure that that's covered. The technology skills, which are, for better or worse, always changing and being added. So many organizations, Procore, Bluebeam, on-screen takeoff, all of these technologies now have these trainings. They have a lot of great videos online. So yes, you could have a formal in-class workshop, but there are also a bunch of great links out there that you could find the content and information yourself, whether using YouTube or on the company's website. Soft skills, leadership skills, technology, certifications, because the construction industry loves certifications. And then last but not least, I would put in-house processes, because and a lot of like larger organizations, learning and development individuals will be like, I don't want to touch SOPs. That's a whole other thing. That's not even on learning and development. But for the smaller companies, for the bigger companies, I disagree anyway. But truly for the smaller ones, I definitely would. That if you want your folks to have ownership and to be accountable, we hear all the time, like no one's accountable anymore. If you want them to be accountable, you have to give them the tools to be accountable. And one of those tools to be accountable is having SOPs in place that people can use to actually own the task at hand and be able to see what success might look like if it's done appropriately. So those are the 6 different buckets I would recommend if when people are thinking about business goals and what trainings they're going to do first. And then deciding, can we prioritize on one? Or if we want to build out like a 12-month program, can we mix it up so that there are a few different ideas? It kind of makes for a more well-balanced learning approach. Some companies are like, we want to go heavy on SOPs this year. Great, that is an approach. And so focusing on one of those buckets makes sense. Others want it to be a little bit more balanced and being able to focus on a few different options. I'm not going to say one is right over the other, because I think at the end of the day, it's dependent on like where are folks struggling the most and going and aligning it back to those business goals. But I love that question. Really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely helpful for those that are starting to roll this out and really getting into learning and development and making it the most successful that they can.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You got it.
So the 3 main points that I'm going to take away from the conversation today is those business goals. So always using those is a great place to start.
Yep.
Whether you are redoing a learning and development program or it's brand new to you, always just figuring out those business goals and going from there.
Okay.
That 70-20-10 experiential learning, which you've been talking about ever since I've met you, and really diving in, bringing everything together and focusing on those different areas.
Yeah, and I think just like acknowledging that it's not just the formal workshops, but how can you be intentional on bringing in some good experiences. And after a formal workshop, what else can you do? Yep, love it. All right, 2.
And balancing it all out. So whether you're going to be doing a year-long L&D program, or you just want to start at just one training, one topic area that you feel like is going to be the most beneficial for your company, starting small, starting there, and even growing it from there, or keeping it small, and whatever is best for the culture of your company.
Yeah. Getting to decide if you want to do one of those 5 or 6 and just focus on that, or have a more well-balanced approach. Love it. Yes. This is great.
Well,
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.